Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our panel here. This panel is going to discuss what it's like to broadcast the old radio shows, not necessarily play them. Of course, we play them when we broadcast them. And we're going to talk about our experiences broadcasting the radio shows and how we prepare, and how we got actually to the position of broadcasting the radio shows, how long we've been doing them, and how we any unusual phone calls or situations that have arisen at the station while we broadcast. We have Max Schmid is supposed to be here, and combined we've been broadcasting 90 years all together here. But I would like to introduce everybody else on the panel, the other two people on the panel. To my right is Chuck Schaden from WINB. Not try again. Okay, NIB Chicago. And he's been broadcasting for 30 years. And to my left is Garry Yoggy, who's also been broadcasting for 30 years. And he's on WCBA in Corning, New York. And myself, Bill Eberly, I've been broadcasting at Vassar College Radio in Poughkeepsie for 10 years. 10 years, it will be my 10th anniversary, November 5th. So we all enjoy doing this, and it's really a lot of fun. Let's see, we have some handouts here that show the schedule of our shows at the end here. I also have my card. I have a web page where, well, I'll get into this about the real audio later. But what I would like to do is have everybody tell us, how you actually started broadcasting. How'd you get your job?
Well, I'm really in awe of Chuck because of what the marvelous things that he's been doing and has done over the years. But I actually go back to 1971 is the first year that I had my own old-time radio show. It was called the Electronic Era. It was a 30-minute show on a local station, actually in Horseheads, New York, which is about 20 miles from where I live. There is a town called Horseheads, New York. And it's between Big Flats and Painted Post, if you want. So we have it's just outside of Elmira. Some of you may have heard of Elmira, but anyway, it's my experience in old-time radio is going to be quite different certainly from Chuck and Max, because they come from big metropolitan areas, and even Poughkeepsie is a lot bigger than the market that I serve. But I got interested in the hobby in 1970, and a friend of mine was a station manager of the station. He was a neighbor and a friend. And I went to him with an idea for a show, and he immediately jumped on it. In fact, we co-hosted it for the first couple of years. So when you get the station manager who's interested enough to co-host it, you don't have any trouble getting on the air. And what that show was, I actually wrote a narrative script every week, and we played excerpts of shows, and it was sort of like a history of broadcasting. We might do a show on, say, Amos and Andy, and we'd trace their careers, and we'd play excerpts from some of their shows and so on. And that's how I got started. It was a 30-minute show once a week. I did that show from 1971 until 1979. I lasted through 4 station manager changes. And then we got a station manager who wanted to change the format completely, go to all music and so on, so that was the end of that. So I took my idea to another station in Corning, New York, which is actually where I live and where I teach. I teach at a 2-year community college in Corning Community College in Corning. Anyway, and I sold him on the idea, and he liked the idea. He wanted me to change it a little. He gave me an hour's time, so I expanded from a half hour to an hour, and he thought I ought to change the name of the show. So from then on, it was called simply the Golden Age of Radio. And from then on, I played longer excerpts and longer portions till I got to the point where I'm playing entire programs now. And we'll get into such issues, I guess, as whether or not you include the commercials, what do you do about cigarette and alcohol commercials, and all those kinds of things, I guess, will come up later. But basically, my experience has been in a small market. We have a regular cadre of listeners who have listened. Some of them have listened to my show ever since the first one on the air in Horseheads. I have very limited range. I mean, you can't get my program more than 30 miles away from the station, so I don't compete with any of these other guys. And although I used to be able to get Chuck's program, there were times when I could actually get Chuck's late night program, but I don't seem to be able to anymore. But there was a program out of a guy named Gary Hudson, used to do old-time radio shows out of Philadelphia, and I used to get his shows too. So I really admired those guys. But I do it, as I say, I did it for fun. I've never been paid, never made any money off it. I have a nice deal with the station where I'm at now, and I've moved through 3 different stations because of a change in management and a change in format of the stations. So I'm at my 3rd station now. I've been on the air for 28 years, but I'm actually at the 3rd station. And what they do is I get a free dinner for 2 at a local restaurant every month. That's a pay I get, which my wife likes because I take my wife, so that's a good deal for her. And I do the show whether I pay them to do the show. I mean, we love to do this. And I guess at this point, here comes Max. At this point, I would simply say that what we're hoping, I think Bill would agree with our whole format this morning, is we're trying to see if we can encourage some interest in some of you folks, especially if you live in small towns and so on. Go to your local station and see if you can sell them on the idea of doing this. It helps keep the art form alive. Many people enjoy this. There is definitely an audience out there for it. We need to win, obviously, younger people to old-time radio if we're going to keep it alive. Someday all of us who actually remember these shows are going to be gone. Perish the thought. But that's what I'd like to see. I'd like to see if we could get a couple people out of the group this morning who are here listening to us, a couple of them go out and go back to their hometowns and try this idea. It's not that difficult. I mean, you can do it very simply, as I say. You play a show, you introduce it, you tell a little bit about it, you play it. I, by the way, pre-record my shows. I have a little semi-studio. It's not sophisticated enough to be a studio, but I do the shows at home on cassette. I take them into the station, and then they transfer them. They have all modern equipment now. They digitize them or whatever. I don't know. I'm not into the technical end that much. But anyway, so I do it at home. Now, so I think Bill does it, and I know Chuck does it live at the station, and they take phone calls, and they have different things. But I get postcards in the mail, and I've had people call me up at home. But remember, I live in a relatively rural, small town area. So anyway, I guess I've talked enough. Turn it over to Chuck and Max.
Okay. Welcome, Max.
Good morning. Good morning.
Support. So how did you start that?
Well, I want to say one thing to Gary. In the earliest days of radio, if you wanted to get on the air, you would walk up to the station and you'd say, I can play the piano or I can sing. And they say, we'll put you on the air. There's no pay, but you can have a sandwich when you're through. So you've really bridged the whole arc from the beginning to today. If you're getting dinner for 2, that's a lot better than something.
Nope, maybe I shouldn't talk.
I had the idea of, I was a collector of radio shows and a hobbyist, and I felt that I wanted to share the shows. You have a hobby, you want to share it with someone. And so I was having people come over to our home on Saturday nights to listen to the radio shows, and after a while you run out of potato chips, and so I thought maybe this could be put on the radio. So I approached a small station in the Chicago suburb, Evanston, with the idea of doing a program of old-time radio shows, and the management liked the station, liked the idea, and they said, "This is a commercial radio station." And they said, well, you can have a show of your own on Saturday afternoons. You just need 2 things. And I said, what is that? And they say, you need to produce the program yourself, and you need to produce a sponsor to pay for the time. So I went out and got a sponsor. I got a Savings and Loan Association to buy an hour's worth of time. And I got the check from them, and I endorsed it and gave it to the radio station. I just thought this is an extension of a hobby. And we went on the air with I was able to negotiate something with them. I said, with the money that we got from the sponsor, I bought 2 hours of time from the radio station, figuring that maybe I could sell the second hour to somebody and maybe get a couple of dollars out of it. It was not the most important thing to me, though, however. The most important thing was being on the radio with the old shows and letting other people hear that. And then I talked the management into giving me letting me do a third hour and let them sell time into the third hour. So they said, okay, so on the 2nd of May of 1970, I went on the air with a 3-hour program called Those Were the Days. And beautiful, sunny Saturday afternoon in May. The competition was the weather and the Chicago Cubs. And boy, I figured the only people listening were my wife and my parents, and I wasn't all that sure about my wife listening, but I knew my mom and dad would be listening. Anyway, we started playing some old-time radio shows, didn't get any response at all from anybody. I was asking, what would you like to hear? What programs would you like to hear? Nothing. The phone would ring and someone would say, who's on first? Stray postcard would come in and they'd say, well, what about, you got a Jack Benny maybe, or something very scattered. And so I thought, gee, there's nobody here. This isn't going to last. And then one day I thought maybe we'll put a program guide out, a little freebie. I worked for a newspaper at the time, by the way. This was just a hobby for me, the radio stuff. And at the newspaper office, we printed up a little flyer with a listing of what we're going to play for the next 6 weeks. And I asked the savings and loan sponsor if they'd be willing to mail that out to somebody, to anybody who requested it. And they said, sure. And rather than just say, if you want a program listing, give us a call and we'll send it to you, I said, if you would like our new and improved program guide, send in a box top, any box top. Just as long as it's something good. And we'll send you the guide for free. 600 box tops came in the mail in the first week. Wow! And we got everything, stuff I wouldn't even mention. But we got the box tops, and then I knew we were off and running, and I also knew that the audience didn't know what they wanted because they hadn't been able to hear this. This was 1970. There was not any radio around. And the radio, when 62 is when CBS finally tossed in the towel, so there was only 8 years from the end of the golden era, or at least the end of the radio days, to all of this stuff. But anyway, we went on and prospered with it on Saturday afternoons. Always been on commercial radio. 5 years at the little station in Evanston. And then as we've all been through this thing, program directors come and go, and management changes and all that. The biggest enemy of old-time radio is program directors. But they change it, they don't want to do it, they want something else, they want to move you here, they want to move you there, and you do all of that stuff. So we were able to move to another station on Saturday afternoons, from the 1,000-watt daytimer in Evanston to a full-service, full-fledged Chicago area FM station, WNIB, where I've been for 25 years now. And we've been doing, it's a 4-hour program now. When we started off on the little Evanston station, they were a mutual affiliate, and we were interrupted every 30 minutes by mutual news on the hour and mutual sports and mutual this and mutual that, and it was really difficult programming these half-hour shows. Never have I broadcast the shows without commercials. I've always played the commercials. I've always played the programs intact, exactly as they were broadcast. The only exception is after the first couple of years, cigarette commercials. The station has asked me to delete cigarette commercials, and when I pleaded the Jack Benny case of the sportsman, they said, well, if it's integrated and part of the entertainment, you can leave it in, but cut out the hard sell commercial. So on the Jack Benny show, for example, the opening spot by the cigarette sponsor, we leave that off. And we run all the way through until the end when Don Wilson says, Jack will be back in just a moment, but first, and we'll kind of fade that and then come up again. And that's the only thing that's out of those shows. Any cigarette programs. When Johnny is calling for Philip Morris, I let Johnny call for Philip Morris, but you don't hear the hard sell for Philip Morris. My own personal opinion on all of that stuff is that if we played those commercials, it would do more to stop people from smoking than anything else. But we've been in this nice niche on Saturday afternoons for, it'll be 30 years next May, and it's been a great joy. We've just had a marvelous time with it. And about About 7 years ago, I decided to play the programs uninterrupted. Prior to that, if we had a half-hour show with a middle commercial in it, an old show with a middle commercial in it, either before or after that middle commercial, we'd fade it down and do business, because we are a commercial station, and then bring it up again at that same point. Usually once, possibly twice in a half-hour show if there were 2 commercials in the middle of the show. An hour-long Lux Radio Theater, for example, we'd take a break after the first act, after the second act, and then 2 breaks in the full-hour show. And since about 8 years ago, we've played the whole program intact, breaking only in hour-long shows, because an hour is too long a block for us. But we've always tried to break the show, and I know you fellows all have tried to do this too, if you have to break, at a logical point. Not just because it's 12 minutes into the show, and break it at a nice logical point. I always like to let the curtain drop. And whenever anybody who listens to me regularly knows that I have a great appreciation for those in the audience who are taping programs off the air. And I always introduce a program the very same way. I may have a number of things to say about the program, but I lead up to the title of the show. So I will go back, talk a little bit about it, and I'll say, so now, from September 21st of 1949, here is radio's outstanding theater of thrills, Suspense. There is a second of silence so that all the play and record buttons can go down, and then the program goes and plays on.
Okay, Max, welcome.
Good morning.
Max is our DJ at WBAI almost 20 years, right?
Over 20
Over
years.
20 years. Can you describe how you got your position at the station, besides the fact that you worked there?
No, that came much later.
Oh, they don't get
I
it.
had real jobs once. Well, I used to tune in on Saturday mornings. There was a show called The Golden Age Radio, believe it or not, that was run by Paul Wonder, whose name people may know from movie ads, and they can't find any critic that anyone's heard of. Paul Wonder can get a blurb in most ads, and he's been the BAI critic for, since at least 1977. At that time, there was a lockout at the station, and when they came back, he had instituted the golden age of radio, but since his interest was in films, he was finding out how to watch radio theaters. And about 8 weeks would go by, and here's the African Queen again. So I finally, and pretty bad sound too, so I had been collecting for a couple of years at that point, and I called him up and said, I'd like to offer you some more programming for your show. So every so often I would drop a load of things down at the station and he would produce them. Then in the summer of '78, they wanted to do a propaganda series, World War II propaganda. So I put that together. I essentially produced it, someone else put it on the air. Then sometime around November of that year, he said to me, I'm not going to do the show anymore. If you want it to stay on the air, you do it. And being a shy and retiring type at the time, I was faced with a serious dilemma, and I finally bit the bullet and decided that it had to stay on. So I started producing, at the time it was an hour show, and I would have to trim it down because our hours are 58 minutes, and I scripted out a little intro, and it all sounded very canned. Eventually I broke out of that mold, and that's how it began.
Okay. And I started, of course, I remember these shows when I was growing up, and as time went on, I wouldn't hear them, and I run across stations that broadcast the old shows, like WCAU in Philadelphia. And then I used to, before I retired from IBM, and I knew a fellow who had a show called Blues After Hours on WVKR, Vassar College. And he said, I talked to the program director that you have a collection of old radio shows, and he wants to know whether you'd like to do a show, broadcast them. I said, I've really never done this kind of thing before, but I said, I thought about a commitment. That was my biggest concern. I'd have to do it every week. So he called me a few days later, and he says, would you reconsider? And I says, okay. So I talked to my friend who introduced me to the people here at WVKR, and they says, well, you're going to need a theme song. And I said, theme song? I'll know that right away, the William Tell Overture. And for my first show, I played The Lone Ranger, my favorite show. It's the most requested show I have. So, let's see, I was going to say something else about that. So I've been doing it for 10 years. We are a independent station. We are flexible as long as we get our station ID plus or minus 5 minutes. And we really don't have commercials, we have PSAs. So very, very soon we'll talk about how we prepare for the show. Matter of fact, we can start that now. How do you prepare for your show, Garry?
Well, I try to get a theme and tie my program around a theme. And of course, holidays. Every holiday, I do lots of holiday shows. Valentine's Day, not just the big ones, Christmas and Easter, but Halloween. I mean, now I'm up to 2 weekends, two shows on Halloween, and I've got Thanksgiving, and I go that 2 weeks, and Christmas I do for a month, So
Arbor Day, Orange Trail.
Right. So anyway, that's one of the things I do. Or I will group together, those great radio detectives, and I'll pair up a couple like Johnny Dollar and Richard Diamond or something like that. Well, Johnny Dollar wasn't really a detective, but I know. But anyway, I try to work things like that. I'm also big, because of my background, I'm big on historical events like the death of FDR and VE Day and VJ Day and all things like that were big on radio, or the 50th anniversary of the War of the Worlds, or the 60th anniversary of the War of the Worlds. And this is one of the reasons. Of course, I only have an hour to work with, so I'm more limited. But I really admire Chuck, and maybe he'll get into this, and I don't want to steal his thunder, but he will take a theme, and he has for 3 hours, and he will take like VE Day or VJ Day and does a beautiful job, and does a narrative in between, and he'll play shows that, broadcast that deal with that. And then it's available. You can order them from him, and for people like me who can't get his station live. So I've gotten quite a few programs from Chuck, and I think that's a great way to do it. The shows that people like the most are, in my case, are comedy shows. I mean, the ones I get the most requests for are things like Fibber McGee and Molly and Jack Benny and shows, The Great Gildersleeve, and shows like that. So, and I do it at home. I plan my schedule a month ahead because the station likes to know, and they promo it. They announce during that week what my show's going to be about, what shows are going to be on that week. I record it at home, as I said. I dub off. I have a double-deck cassette player, and that's about it. Now, one other thing that I didn't mention before, and I don't know if these other fellows do it or not, but it's fairly common among stations that do old-time radio. Christmas Eve, I have a 6-hour block of time on Christmas Eve, which is my favorite time. I've been doing this for about 20 years. There's a 6-hour block of time from 6 p.m. until midnight on Christmas Eve. I do all Christmas shows. And I try to do different ones every year, so that's why I've been collecting Christmas shows. I always look for shows that I don't have or have never played, on the air. But we have just little brief announcements. They do get sponsors for it, but they just say so-and-so retirement home wishes you Merry Christmas, or Savings and Loan presents holiday greetings, and that's it. And then they let me have that 6-hour block of time. And those I used to do live. For a long time I did them live, as Chuck does, and we even took phone-ins. But it was Christmas Eve, and I don't know, my family after a while, they got tired of me. So now I pre-record those too, because then I don't have to be at the station on Christmas Eve. But that's an extra thing that I do with my.
How long does it take to plan a show? Well, I do a 4-hour show every week, and I'm really working very far in advance, because I have a magazine that we offer to listeners called the Nostalgia Digest and Radio Guide, and it carries listings for Those Were the Days program for 2 months in advance, and with printing deadlines and mailing deadlines and all that sort of thing, we have to work quite a bit in advance. I just finished programming December and January, so I'm already into the millennium now, into the new millennium with old-time radio. But I would say basically it takes me about 8 hours to produce the 4-hour show that I do. Listen to everything in advance, time everything in advance, make notes about everything in advance. I'm not scripted. but I have a 3x5 card with notes on it. And if I listen to a program, as you fellows do, I'm sure, something unusual pops up in there, you recognize the voice of an actor who's not credited, you make a note of that so you can mention that to the listening audience. Sometimes there's some reference to something that only someone with a real sense of history would know what they're talking about. You have to find out what that is if you don't know it and make a comment about that. Do that a lot with Fred Allen shows because he's very topical sometimes and people don't know what he's referring to. So it takes about 8 hours to do a 4-hour broadcast. And I always do it live. We broadcast from the studio in the Museum of Broadcast Communications in the Chicago Cultural Center in downtown Chicago. I've been doing it since the museum is open now for 11 years, and it's open to the public. And you can come in, and the museum is free to the public, and you can come in and see the show. And very few people sit down for 4 hours in the studio and listen to the whole show. Even though we're broadcasting the tapes in there, you don't listen to, you all know this, you don't listen to old-time radio in a big situation like this. It's very personal. You're listening in the car, you're listening in your home, in a room in the basement while you're painting, washing the walls or doing the dishes or something like that. So it's very personal kind of a thing. But people do come and go, they like to see how we're doing it, and we have a state-of-the-art broadcast studio there. And in effect, as part of the Museum of Broadcast Communications, I am one of the artifacts at the museum on Saturday afternoons. Tour guides come through and they point out, and they say, this is our resident dummy, I guess. That's right, because we have, at the museum, we have Charlie McCarthy and Mortimer Snerd and Effie Klinker there that the Bergen family donated to the museum. We have Jack Benny's vault exhibit there, which was dedicated by Joan Benny and George Balzer, and we have a big exhibit dedicated to Fibber McGee and Molly, and if you come in, you open the door of Fibber's hall closet, and all the junk comes crashing out at you. And the Benny Vault exhibit and the Jack Benny exhibit were paid for by listeners to our program who wanted to honor those radio shows, and they sent in money. They sent in laborers who helped us build and design the exhibits. And for their contributions, they got their name on a permanent plaque, which is there, so people come up and they can look and they say, gee, Jack Benny's Vault was created by, and there's my name. So that's really nice. So I guess I'm answering more than your question, but that's fine.
Max, how do you prepare for a show?
Years ago, our station had a program guide, which they discontinued for financial reasons in the last few years. And I used to prepare a schedule in advance, try to get printed. And I would discover that people would die, and I'd have to do a special. The schedule would get knocked out of order, or there'd be a war, and of course BAI would love to jump in there and preempt everyone to cover whatever events are coming up. So advanced scheduling sort of, I did away with that. Now what I do, my show is on Sunday. I work a 12-hour shift at the radio station on Sunday from 6 p.m. till 6 a.m. So I get out of bed around 3 o'clock, and I scratch my head and go dig through tapes and put a show together. What I like to do is have a continuing series, one series. At the moment it's Dragnet. It was Jack Benny before that. I've done Scarlet Queen. Anything that has a thread running through it, and I'll run consecutive episodes for maybe a season, a quarter of a year, or whatever. Because I think this helps give the audience something to look forward to, and then the rest is just mix and match. Comedy, either I go on a theme or mix it up, find something obscure.
There's a method to our madness, right?
Well, sure. And generally, since I get so few requests, I usually honor requests within a week or two if they're worthy.
I've had some of those requests too, but I'm still on the air.
I thought of something that Max drew to my attention. Yeah, I'm big on tribute shows, like on the 20th anniversary of Jack Benny's death, or the 25th anniversary of his death, or the 100th anniversary of his birthday, or, and when someone dies, when Groucho Marx died, or John Wayne died, I did a radio special, and Lucille Ball, Hall, and all of the different big stars like that, and the anniversaries of their birthdays, or the anniversaries, of, as I say, of their death if they're dead, or just tribute shows, sometimes just for the fun of it, or if it's commemorating something like War of the Worlds. That's one of the themes that I use. And the other thing I do, and I know Chuck has done this, I don't know how extensively, but about in 1988 was the first year I did this. But because I'm involved in my community theater, I'm very active in my community theater, Elmira Little Theater it's called. I talked them into letting me do a radio recreation and opening it up to the public. Yeah, because I had come to all these conventions for so many years, and October 30th, on a Sunday evening, on the 50th anniversary of War of the Worlds, we did War of the Worlds in our local theater, our community group. We packed the place. We did one performance, and people loved it. So every year since then, I've done about a 2-hour recreation. And what I did after the first couple of years, I started inviting guests to come in. Like Ezra Stone came one year, I had Willard Waterman one year, and Lon Clark came one year, and I've had Rosemary Rice and Bob Hastings and Will Hutchins and Fred Foy and so on. Anyway, and then they work with the local actors and actresses in the other parts. And then we record those. We don't broadcast that live. I record those, and then I broadcast them on my show later, a couple of weeks after that, I broadcast them. So that's a couple of programs out of the year that I do that. So anyway.
Okay. I, like everyone else, I try to have shows that are pertinent to the season, or if someone passes away, I'll do a little tribute to that person. And most of my shows, I'd say at least half of the shows that I play are by request, and I do enjoy hearing from people, and they have, their favorites. And what I do is, in preparing for the show, first of all, I used to use a dual cassette recorder. I bring that to the station. And I put the first one in the first deck, and then when I was through, I play the second one, and then I have to take out the first one, and keep going back and forth. So I don't know how I heard of it, but right now I have a mini disc player. So I put all my shows on a mini disc player. And what the mini disc player is that you can put in the shows in any order you want. You can rearrange them any way you want. You can put the titles of the show, Dragnet, Superman. So I push the start button, it stops. I can talk, do a PSA, start it again, and there's a countdown, just like a CD, so I know how much time I have. When I'm on the phone and I'm trying to listen to the person on the phone and the radio to know when I have to stop it, it's inconvenient. So I can look at my counter and I'll say, well, I got 20 seconds to go here, I have to leave. So, and the quality sounds really good, so almost sounds like a salesman for the mini disc players. So, I have notes to myself. Just like what you're saying, if I find something unique in that show, of course, obviously I listen to all the shows that I play. Something unique, a voice that is not identified, I will say that. Something unusual. Like I had Jack Benny with him opening the vault. Now I told people it's coming up, and I called him and says, I got the tape recorder, I'm ready for it. It's the only one, I only have one recording of Jack Benny opening his vault, so I thought that was pretty good. So, I think we've covered that pretty good. Now, we mentioned cigarette commercials and the playing of Amos and Andy. How do we handle that? You sort of mentioned
Amos and Andy, we don't play it.
Yeah.
The station has asked us not to play Amos and Andy, and the station doesn't give us any trouble on anything, so we don't play Amos and Andy. That's all.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I have to say, I did protest when they said, we don't want you to play any Amos and Andy, and I said, I looked back and I said, I played Amos and Andy only 3 times in the last year. Well, then you won't miss it, they said, if you don't play it. And I said, but there isn't anything wrong. And they said, well, if you can get a letter from the NAACP, then you can play it. Well, can I get a letter from the NAACP? So I don't play it. And I miss it, and people miss it, but when I tell a listener, they say, why don't you play Amos and Andy? And I said, because the station is concerned that there might be some listeners who would take offense at it. They say, well, yeah, I guess I understand. And so we don't play Amos and Andy.
That's interesting, and I think Max probably feels the same way.
But except that I do it on my own. I wasn't told by the station. Well, I wasn't told by the station, but believe me, there are pressures in the hallway about certain types of programming. Yeah, it's a very political station, and I like to stay on the air. So I can sacrifice Amos and Andy for peace in the house.
Well, maybe because I come from a small rural area, relatively small, and we have like 5% maybe black population, although believe it or not, I've had blacks tell me they enjoy the show. I do maybe 2 a year. Nobody's ever told me not to do them. I've never had any flack. I have people say they enjoy the show, that it's one of their favorite shows. I do almost every Christmas, I do the Amos and Andy Christmas show, which to me is one of the most beautiful shows of any format or any whatever, race, whatever it is. I mean, I don't see anything offensive about the Amos and Andy Christmas show. Now, maybe somebody else does. But I've been lucky, I guess. I mean, I want to stay on the air too, and I don't want to offend anybody. I've never had, to this date, and I've been doing these shows for 28 years, and I did Amos and Andy from the very beginning. But I don't overdo it. It's not one that I do a lot. Like Jack Benny, I might do 6, 8 times a year. Amos and Andy maybe twice. But I've never had a problem with that. I've never had a problem with the cigarette commercials, although I must admit, and this is on my own, I always do a disclaimer, kind of with a little chuckle, saying, now, we're not promoting any of these products, but especially we're not promoting the cigarette products. But, the auctioneer on the Jack Benny show selling the Lucky Strikes, that's so much a part of that show that I leave that in there. Sometimes I'll cut commercials at the end, if I'm out of time or, I'm running out of time, whatever the product is, just to tighten it up. But I leave the commercials, the middle commercials almost always I leave, and I don't like to break the show, just as Chuck said. And it spoils the continuity, and it spoils we're trying to recreate, the past. That's the way I look at it. That's one of the reasons I justify Amos and Andy. It's part of our heritage, a part of our history, it's part of the past. And nobody can deny, as much as you might object, that it was the top ranked show on radio for years and years. So anyway, I've never, fortunately, I've never had a problem, and I've worked for at least 8 different station managers at 3 different stations. But it's a small, relatively rural area, so I'm sure that has something to do with it.
I also play the cigarette commercials.
I just wanted to follow up a little bit. The trouble I got into in my early days were with programs such as The Shadow of Fu Manchu, which was, we had a serial, we had a 5-day-a-week serial at all different times of the day and night, and I would put those together. That ran about 2 days, and they got a letter from a group, or at least it was signed by 2 people, the Asian Self-Defense Group, and I was called into the program director's office, given a speech about being the enemy of the people and all this nonsense. So eventually what we decided to do, they said, if you want to play this sort of thing, you need to put a disclaimer on it, because obviously our audience is so stupid that unless you explain to them, the cultural context of the times and all. So what we did was we had everybody in the station that wanted to would do a disclaimer, some very serious and some most amusing. That's maybe the highlight of the series, actually. When I got Dr. Michio Kaku, a famed nuclear physicist, to do a disclaimer for Fu Manchu.
I remember I was playing Sergeant Preston once, and they talked about a half-breed. So somebody called me and says, that's not very nice. I said, well, that's the way they referred to back in those days. And I also do the commercials. I leave the commercials in, and I always do a disclaimer. And sometimes, based on what the commercial says, like 9 out of 10 doctors smoke. I said, these are pretty silly, and little do we know, then what we do now. As a matter of fact, I had a young woman call me up once. She said, are you going to be playing any shows tonight that have cigarette commercials in them? I said, you're in luck, I have 3 of them. And I did the disclaimer in front of each one just to make sure somebody didn't tune in late and miss the disclaimer. And as for Amos and Andy, I will play this by request, and I always play the Christmas one. That's a really great one. And no one has ever in 10 years ever said anything, nasty to me or, questioned Amos and Andy. And I think it's a really funny show. I mean, it's really excellent.
Now, I have a friend who does another late night program, and he does big Christmas kind of guy. He's African American, and he asks me for that show on a fairly regular basis, and he plays it, and he's willing to take the flack. And I must say that when I have had requests for Amos and Andy, it's mostly from folks who sound like they're uptown.
Yeah.
So, and older folks. So it's the youngsters today who don't know what the program is, who, want to condemn it without hearing it.
The older people are not politically correct, right? Or something.
I could well.
You talk about disclaimers. I did a 4-year retrospective of World War II on the 50th anniversary of World War II. I started on December 7th of 1991 and continued into September, whatever, the 8th or so of 1995. And we did once a week, but we did almost a month by month and a week by week and a year by year look at World War II. And we played news broadcasts regularly, we played all the entertainment shows, we played documentaries, we played special broadcasts, we played FDR's speech before the joint session of Congress on the 8th of December of 41. We did all along the line, and when you play a wide range of programs that were World War II oriented, you're going to get a lot of comments about the Japanese, and you're going to get a lot of comments about the Germans. And from time to time, we would say we edited nothing, we cut nothing out of it. Nobody asked me to do anything, but I did make a disclaimer from time to time, as it seemed to warrant, that these programs reflect a nation at war a long time ago. And it reflects the thinking and the attitudes of the nation at that time. And I never heard from anybody, from any one way or another on that. And we got a lot of wonderful, wonderful response at this 4-year retrospective. It was something I'm very proud of that we were able to do. It grew like topsy, too. It grew. We started, we'll do a little bit here and a little bit there, but as we uncovered things and found more and more things, it
Then
became...
you ended with World War II in 4 hours, which I thought was magnificent.
Oh, we just did that. We
You just did that?
Yeah, right.
That was great. I
4 hours.
got a copy of that. I thought that was marvelous.
That's what's nice about radio with this. You can do things sort of the way you want, and you sort of plan things out in a logical order, And but